Thank you and welcome. Welcome. I'm a little lady, have to go up to the next step. It's where my whiteboard is. So thank you. I'm surprised you're all here considering the weather's a bit wet. And we did dive in this morning. I didn't see anyone else there. And it's up a foot. We've had a lot of rain, eh? But it's all right. You can see I wasn't swept away. I'm used to diving in flooded creeks, but I just go on the very edge. Jess said she was just waiting in case I was swept away and she would jump in and grab me. But it gives such an amazing boost in the morning. Before we begin, I'd like to start with a word of prayer and ask the greatest teacher that's ever walked this planet to teach us. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this incredible body that you gave us. And thank you so much for the knowledge on how to get the most out of it and even to turn around if we're going in the wrong direction, as the pastor shared with us. At any point, we can turn and go in another direction, a direction of healing. Thank you. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. So what we're going to be looking at this morning, we're going to be looking at another aspect of the microorganisms we looked at yesterday, those little creepy crawlies in our body. We looked at the cycle of life yesterday, and I'm going to go over the cycle of life again, but we're going to take a tangent. And as we go through this, you will understand why. Micro means cannot be seen with the naked eye. Organism means it's living. Microorganisms are everywhere. And when I was in Fallbrook, California, I'm still getting to know the United States of America. You've got a lot of states. It's real easy in Australia. We've got 5. But I know that's over on that side of your country. There was an organic farm there, and we visited the organic farm. 150 acres was just incredible, and it was just soft hills, and one hill was just covered in strawberries, the biggest strawberries I have ever seen. It was impressive. Nothing eating the leaves, nothing eating the strawberries. And I don't know about you, but you almost get the message, yeah, organic's nice, but it's sort of shriveled up and small. Have you ever get that message? Well, these were the biggest strawberries I've ever seen. So I was looking for Joe, and Joe's, I don't know, late 70s, and it was his father's farm. And I wanted to talk to him because I wanted to know, and this is, God put it on the tip of our lips, why? He gave us a brain that wants to know why. Unfortunately, the education system today, it almost takes that out of children. And I was so glad, and I thank God daily and still do, that I could homeschool my children. And you don't have to teach a child to ask why. In fact, isn't that the name of a 4-year-old? Why at every single step? But that's how they learn. It's how they learn. I want to know why these strawberries were so big. So I talked to Joe, and I wanted to know the history, and he said when he was 15, he was getting so sick from mixing all the chemicals up on his father's farm. So he asked his father, could he have 5 acres and go organic? Wasn't long before it was 20 acres. Wasn't long before the property had to have a bit of a cleanse to bring it back to an organic status. He said, I can't believe how much money we spent on chemicals. Now, some people who are growing commercially think that it's too expensive to grow organic. You may have heard that as well. And maybe the crossover, but remember what Joe said, I can't believe how much money we used to spend on chemicals. And I was talking to an organic dairy farmer in Australia, similar thing. When he was 20, his father went organic and he was now 44. He said, I can't believe how much money we used to spend on vets. You have vets here? He said, we're never called out to a cow having trouble in calf birth anymore. So what's happening to humans? And the reason I'm talking about this as I talk about microorganisms is because what I asked Joe next was, show me your compost bins. Because I know that to get vegetables like that, they must be receiving minerals. And to get the minerals out of the soil, you must feed the soil so that it's rich in microorganisms. And that's what an organic farmer values are his microorganisms, because it's the microorganisms in the soil that break down the minerals in the soil and make them available for the plant. And the flavour of those strawberries was intense. You know what you're tasting? You're tasting minerals. And I've had some pretty nice tomatoes here over the last few days, and I know they're organic, I know they're locally grown, and the flavour's intense. When you taste that, you're tasting minerals. So sad today that a lot of commercial growing, they poison the soil and whenever you spray insecticides on plants, you know what you're doing, you're killing the bugs, but you're also lowering the mineral content because that poison goes into the soil. And you know what it does to the microbes? It starts killing off the microorganisms. That's why we've got to start at the soil. And if someone says to me they want to be a naturopath, they want to be a medical missionary, you know what I say to them? You've got to start by becoming a gardener. Because when you understand how to grow healthy plants, guess what? You're starting to get a little bit of an idea of how to grow healthy human beings. Yes, the microorganisms in the soil are of the utmost importance, because if the soil's rich, the plant's rich, and the human that eats that plant is going to be well supplied with minerals. In his book, The Calcium Lie, Robert Thompson, fascinating story. He was a GP and he was confronted, and I'm sure many ethical doctors are, with the fact that it's not working. The same people keep coming back. It's not working. He was challenged with that. He had nights where he couldn't sleep because drugs, as we've talked about, never cure disease. They might mask the symptoms, and if someone's in really excruciating pain, that there might be a time where that is necessary, but they never heal. It's the body and the body alone that will heal, and it will heal if you give it the right conditions. And to understand those conditions, we've actually got to start with the microorganisms. So Dr. Robert Thompson, he was about to get out of medicine, but it's a bit hard when you've just spent 7 years to get your ticket. So he decided to do a nutrition course, and his eyes were opened. And he said, we learnt this, but very briefly. And I was also talking to one doctor, and they said, nutrition is optional. Huh? And when they become a doctor, the doctors take the Hippocratical oath. First, to do no harm. But you know what Hippocrates said? Let food be your medicine. Let medicine be your food. Because we're built up from what we eat. And Dr. Robert Thompson, he wrote his book, The Calcium Lie. He's got another chapter in the book. It's called The Fat Lie, The Cholesterol Lie, The Salt Lie. There's a whole lot which we are touching on this week. Tonight, when we go to the heart, and everyone that has a heart should be there, you're going to see that our heart needs salt. And yet, what have we been told for so many years? If you've got high blood pressure, stop the salt. No. Our body needs the salt because it needs the minerals. It's minerals that literally glues us together. Dr. Robert Thompson, in his book, The Calcium Light's only a little book, but I tell you, it's power-packed. It's one of the most fascinating books I've read. When anyone says, Barbara, this is a good book, you should read it, I read it. Sometimes it's amazing, sometimes I get a little bit out of it, sometimes not much, but I'm always learning something. But I have a habit of speed reading, and I speed read. And then if something looks interesting, I'll go back and read it properly. So sometimes, I don't know if you call it waffle, packing things out with a lot of la-di-da-di-da-di-da. I don't like waffle. I like going straight to the point. And some books got a lot of waffle, but not the calcium lie. Dr. Robert Thompson, he shows in his book, he has the figures, that 50 years ago there was twice as many minerals in the soil as there is today. So a lot of people today are mineral deficient, and that's contributing to so many problems. So to start with, we've got to start with the soil, feed it well. And Joe showed me his compost bins. He was very proud of his well, it wasn't compost bins, it was compost paddocks. But you don't say paddock, do you? You say field. Is that right? Yep. Got to get the language right. So he had whole sections, and he had big tractors in there moving that compost up and around, and that told me why his strawberries look so good. And that's why nothing was eating his strawberries. They were so strong, they were so mineral rich that they resist the bugs. Did you hear that? Does that mean that if our body is mineral rich, it will resist the bugs? Let's have a look at these bugs. Microorganisms are everywhere, and they're an integral part of life on planet Earth. They're an integral part of this organic farm. They're an integral part of the running of our body, of our gastrointestinal tract. And after the break, we're going on a very exciting journey through the gastrointestinal tract. And you will see as we get further down in the gastrointestinal tract, wow, there's a huge population of microorganisms down there. But whenever cell damage happens, these microorganisms have the ability to change roles, just as we change roles. They become the cleanup team, or as we looked at, the garbage collectors. Have you noticed when the garbage collectors come to take the garbage, they don't take your front gate, they don't take your fence, because all they do is take garbage. Same with these microorganisms. And their name is bacteria. If bacteria is present, we've got to find out why. And basically, how would you know? And then some people say, I had a blood test. I said, well, blood tests can sometimes be wrong, and our body's constantly changing. It's here in the US, a television program called Know the Cause. And Know the Cause is run by Doug Kaufman. And he's written some interesting books. One book's called The Germ That Causes Cancer. And we're going to be looking at that tonight. And he's also written a few books called The Fungal Link Book 1, The Fungal Link Book 2, The Fungal Link Book 3. Fascinating author. So if you Google that, you'll have a look at Doug Kaufman. So bacteria is not a problem. And as Doug Kaufman says, you can have 5 different blood tests at 5 different pathologies in the day, and every blood test can come back a little different. Now, he's a guy that's worked in medicine, and he knows. Remember Psalm 146, verse 3, put not your trust in princes, neither in the Son of Man in whom there is no help. That's the authorities in the field. I believe that the doctors should stop putting total trust in the pharmaceutical companies, because they say they've tested it, but I know. In fact, I don't know if you've seen Robert Kennedy Jr. recently, but he said the vaccines are not tested. They're not tested. They're not tested. And yet we trust too much. Every parent that vaccinates their child does it because they want the best for their child, but they don't realize. So if someone says, should I vaccinate my child? I said, I'm not going to tell you what to do. But if I was you, I would investigate. Go to Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. She will show you what's in those vaccines. We need to know what's going into our body, what's going into our children's body, because I love the way the pastor said, because it's our God-given right. In fact, it's parents' right to choose what happens to their children. And of course you can't abuse your children. There's common sense there. And it's our God-given right to choose what happens in our bodies. So remember, if you've had a blood test that looks a bit scary, it could be wrong. In fact, a lady was saying to my husband one day, but she said, look at the blood test. He said, oh, I don't believe them. She said, Michael, they're blood tests from the doctors. And he said, yeah, but sometimes they get it wrong. Do you know, most people don't even think that. It is possible that sometimes they get it wrong. So let's have a look at this cycle of life. Whenever there's cell damage, the bacteria comes in. It's the clean-up teams, the garbage collectors, and it starts to clean it up. A good illustration, and this used to happen in the war, some people think it's a bit of a scary story. If there was a wound that was not healing, they would allow the blowfly to lay the maggots there, and the maggots would clean up the wound. And that person never said, ouch. If they said, ouch, what would that indicate? The maggot took a bite out of the good flesh, because that's where the feeling is. No, no, no. They only clean up the garbage. That's all they do. Now, we had a nurse and she said, actually, they're going back to that, but because no one can bear to think of a blowfly and maggots, they get the maggots and put them into a little thin bag, and they suck the waste through the bag. They put that in the wound. They're just the garbage collectors. As the environment changes, they become the exterminators. The exterminators are part of taking away the damage. Their name is yeast, fungus, and they have another name, virus. You see, they all need a host. As the environment changes, they become the undertakers, and undertakers take away dead things. And their name is mold. And it's about this stage, it's just about back to dust. It's the cycle of life. The cycle of life is the cycle that takes matter back to dust. And when you think about it, if it wasn't for these microorganisms, there would be so much rubbish on the planet, so much garbage, you wouldn't be able to walk on the planet. That's their role on the planet. They are the performers in the cycle of life. They're the players in the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle, the cycle of life that brings matter back to dust. The other day when we looked at the carbon cycle, I looked at a very popular drug today called an antibiotic. I'm not against antibiotics, but I think they should be kept as life-saving. That's all, life-saving. Now look at the word. Anti means against, biotic means life. If we're living organisms, we have to get away from the kill mentality. Because anything that has the ability to kill a small organism has the potential to kill a large. What are we? We're the large. Alexander Fleming in 1929, growing bacteria in flasks in his laboratory, came in one morning. They were all dead, and he found the cause was a mold waste coming down. He called the mold penicillium. But the mold waste, which is more toxic than the mold, and it was the mold waste that was floating down from the next story onto his bacteria and killing it. And he called the mold waste penicillic acid. And penicillic acid is the penicillin that we know today. Medically, a mold waste is called a mycotoxin. How many people, when they have an antibiotic, then the next week they've got thrush? Because they've just put a mold waste into their body. And the human body can cope with 1 or 2 doses in a lifetime. But unfortunately, there's not many people that you can say that about. My son James, he works out, big muscles. He's in his 40s now, but when he was about 28, he overdid it. And his arm swelled. And he knew what Mum used to do, put a grated potato poultice on his arm. And that got the tissue swelling down. But the elbow was still very swollen and sore. So he decided to do what everyone else did. He'd never done it before in his life. Go to the doctor. Don't think he's ever been since. He went to the doctor and the doctor said, you've got bursitis. What's bursitis? Just inflammation of the bursa. And the bursa is the fluid around that joint. He said, take this antibiotic. James stood up. He looked at the doctor and he said, I've never taken an antibiotic in my life and I'm not about to start. And he left. Do you think that doctor has ever heard that? James just thought he'd try it and see what these guys are saying. Mum never took me, now he knows why Mum never took him. And then he rang Mum and I said, joint, ginger. Grate up some ginger and put that on the joint. I think it's Saturday morning we're going to be looking at Saturday evening, afternoon, we're looking at some natural remedies where I'll be defining it. Anyway, it took the inflammation down and the bursa went down and he was fine. You see, antibiotics, they've saved the lives of millions, granted. But we've got a problem today and it's the overuse of antibiotics. In Australia, you can go into every doctor's surgery and it'll have a plaque saying the World Health Organization's greatest health risk today is the overuse of antibiotics. Because you know what's happening? People are becoming immune to antibiotics for overuse, and then they get a serious problem, and the antibiotic that certainly would save a life in a serious problem is not working. And as one young woman told me, she'd taken so many antibiotics for urinary tract infections, they wasn't doing it anymore. So the doctor put her on a double dose. She was only 40. She went blind. Well, not totally, could hardly see. She went to the eye doctor. He said, there's nothing wrong with your eyes. And at that point, she knew it was time for her to take control of her health. And she did. But it took a little while for her to once again restore her gut. Because remember what drugs do, they just come in and say, get out of my way, I've got a job to do, whether you need it or not. Whereas the herbs work with the body, which we're going to have a look at in a minute. Can you see the way these microorganisms adapt and adjust to the situation? And this explains why we've got superbugs today. You've heard of superbugs, it almost scares people. One is golden staph. And a lady told me this story. She had a hysterectomy, she went home, and every day her stomach's getting bigger and bigger, and one day she woke up and it had burst and there was just pus, blood, anyway, won't go into it. She rang up the hospital. You know what they said to her? Don't come in. Why did they say that? Any nurses in the room will know exactly where I'm going. She had golden staph. Where did she get the golden staph from? In the hospital. And they don't want her to come in because it might go to others. We'll send a nurse out. We'll send a nurse out to dress, and sometimes they try about 3 or 4 different antibiotics to try and kill the golden staph. Very, very difficult. We had a girl that was working for us for a while, a few years ago now, and she had eczema. And she used to scratch, and then her legs got bigger, and then she got sores all over her legs. And Marcus said to her, I want you to go to the doctor and find out what's happening there. golden staph. And she came home, possibly she scratched with dirty fingernails, I don't know, but golden staph, yeah, he's in there, he's one of the bacteria. And she had 2 very strong courses of antibiotics, and then she came to me. So even with staph, a man convinced against his will be of the same opinion still. I don't help unless I'm asked. So then she came to me. She said, "Can you help?" I said, "I certainly can help. We're going to make a few adjustments in your in your eating habits." Do you know she just lived on raw food? And it's very difficult to get enough protein if you only eat raw food. A cup of lentil sprouts will give 6.5 grams of protein. A cup of cooked lentils will give you 15 grams of protein. So I said, "I want you to start having some cooked legumes." "Okay," she said. She did not like her father, and her father loved lentils. So we had to work with that one a little bit. I said, "Choose your hard. Eat the cooked beans, or put up with this terribly uncomfortable situation in your legs." She said, I'm willing to do whatever you say." And I said, "And a few more nuts and seeds." You see, raw food will deliver what cooked food won't, and cooked food will deliver what raw won't. And on a cool morning, you need a bit of warm food in your stomach. And there's a really good way to warm up your salad. Put crushed garlic and cayenne pepper all over it. That'll warm up your salad. And so you see, I had to change the diet a little bit because, and I don't know whether you've met some vegetarians, they're pretty sick. And it gives vegetarianism a bad name. And one vegetarian is having cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea. It's just too many carbohydrates, as we looked at yesterday. But this girl, she was another extreme. She didn't eat any cooked food. She needed a little cooked food. And then I made up a tea out of golden seal. Do you know, God's got an answer to every problem. He's even got an answer to golden staph. It's called golden seal. And golden seal is anti-staphylococcic. How's that? Anti-staph. So what I did was we got her to take the capsules by mouth, and I made up a tea, soaked bandages in it, and wrapped it round her whole legs, this golden seal tea. I got an old jumper, you call it sweater, woolen one from the second-hand shop, cut the sleeves off and put that over the bandages so that the water, the moist wouldn't seep out while she slept. What was amazing, every day we saw improvement. Every day the swelling went down and the wounds began to heal. Yeah? Yeah, because if it's deeper, you just take it by mouth and the blood picks it up. And remember, the blood's the healer. The blood's the healer of any problem in the body. And the problem with this girl is her blood did not have the nutrients. And if ever you've got itching in your body, don't scratch. Ice it. And that's what I said to her. If you have any itching, don't scratch. You just put a block of ice on there and rub it around. In fact, when I was in Alabama a few years ago, I got chiggers. You know chiggers? I never heard of chiggers. And I had about 5 bites on me, and I just said to them, what's these bites? It's 24 hours and they're still itching. And they said, chiggers. Well, I never heard of chiggers. But apparently it's a little mite, gets under the skin, and they said, you'll be scratching for 6 weeks. And I made a decision never to scratch. What I did was I just get ice. And often I'd only have to do it twice a day, and that'd bring me relief for many hours. And if I iced it before I went to bed, I'd ice one, then the next one, then the next one, then the next one, and I'd go through every bite about 3 times, and then I could sleep all night. And it was 10 days. and I was over it. And they said, we've never seen such a thing. See, the worst thing you can do for a bite, for an itch, is scratch, because it damages the skin. You've got to protect that skin. It's like one guy that had scabies. He says, what can I do? And I looked at his arm and I could see the scratch marks. I said, the problem is you're scratching. You got to get a block of ice whenever that itches. Because once you damage the skin, then we've got more microorganisms coming along to clean up the damage. You see the vicious cycle that happens? So golden seal is a very expensive herb, but you do not need very much. That's the good news. But we're seeing a lot of people today with infestation of yeasts, funguses, candidas. It can come from antibiotic use. So I'm going to go to the gut for a moment to show you what's happening in the gut. And as we looked at earlier, lining the gastrointestinal tract is Lactobacillus acidophilus, bifidobacterium, a whole lot of bacteria that I just mentioned, the two permanent, and Candida albicans. If someone says, I've got Candida, I said, congratulations, we all have. Our body runs according to precision balance. So the antibiotic comes in, remember the robot with the kill mentality, I must kill the bacteria, kill all the good bacteria as well. And what happens when the good bacteria is killed? The candida can get out of control. And at the same time, the person has just put a mold waste, a mycotoxin into their body. What's a toxin? It's a poison. So the mycotoxin goes into the body, and that's just going to feed it even more. So then we get an outgrowth of yeast candida. How do you know if you've got it in your body? Well, there are so many different symptoms, but the tongue is a good guide. The tongue should be pink from the tip to the back. Usually in the break, everyone's running to the bathroom to look at their tongue. If you can scrape the white coating off, it's waste. And when we looked at detoxification, we looked at oil pulling, how that oil pulling can help to pull the waste out. If you cannot scrape it off, they're little fungus buds. Do you remember those from my era, when doctors used to look at your tongue? They don't look at tongues anymore because there's hardly a tongue that would be pink. And yesterday we looked at that high carbohydrate diet, that high sugar diet. Can you imagine what that does to yeast? It's a big feeder. So the million-dollar question is, how can we be exposed to yeasts and funguses? In 4 ways. It can come in through the skin. So if there's a moldy orange on the plate, don't touch it because your skin can pick it up. There is a time for a mask. I can't think of any other time. Got that? You wear the mask so that when you pick up that moldy orange with tongs, ideally, and put it into something, because you can breathe it in. So it can come in via your skin, you can breathe it in, you can ingest it. As you will see in a minute, and we touched on this when we looked at the immune system, you've got a wonderful, strong defense in your hydrochloric acid. And if hydrochloric acid is strong, it can actually wipe out. It can wipe out the yeast and the fungus. That's the good news. But many people today don't have strong hydrochloric acid. When we go on our journey through the gut, I will show you how that can be boosted. So it can come in through the skin, you can breathe it in, you can ingest it, which certainly can take a hold on the body if the hydrochloric acid is low. And if they come down to the gastrointestinal tract, the small intestine, and they find some of the gut flora has been wiped out, can you see then it can get into the blood? But the 4th way it can be transmitted is sexually. Most sexually transmitted diseases have a fungal base. So the million-dollar question is, how do we get it out of the body? But I'm going to tell you a story first to show you how dangerous this is. And this happened in Australia, and a friend of mine met the wife of the man that this happened to. So 4 men were asked to clean out a silo. The silo had water damage in it. So if a silo has got water damage in it and moisture's getting into the grain, what's happening to the grain? Mouldy. So they'd scooped it all out, but you know, not even the pigs would eat it. Isn't that incredible? Not even the pigs would eat it, so they had to bury it. And we had a pig when my children were little, and well, I think they'll eat anything, but not mould. And one man said, we can clean out this silo quickly. We'll just get a shovel and we'll just loosen the white on the walls. What's the white? It's mould. The other 3 men said, nah, we're going to get some covering. And they went and got all dressed, and they looked like they were about to walk on the moon. They had breathing apparatus, they were totally covered. And when they went into the silo, their friend was lying on the floor, dead. They ran to him, he was dead in 10 minutes. When he got the shovel and loosened, do you call it a shovel? Spade. When he loosened it, there was a huge puff of mould, mycotoxin mould waste. He breathed it in, it went through his skin, he ingested it, and his body, with this massive influx of poison, he just had an anaphylactic shock with it, and he died. That story even got in the newspaper, and my friend spoke to his wife to verify the story. This stuff is toxic. That's why I say don't go near it, don't touch it. And you never clean a mouldy bathroom with bleach. Because what bleach does, bleach kills mould and feeds fungus. So you clean something with bleach, and a few weeks later, there it is again, sometimes even worse. And I was watching a show on mycotoxins, and it was in an apartment that had water damage in the Bronx, and one whole wall was mouldy. So they got one half of the wall and they cleaned it with white vinegar. White vinegar kills fungus, kills mould. And then they wiped it over with some essential oils, clove, thyme essential oil. They're very strong fungal killers. The other wall, they cleaned with bleach. They shut up the room. They came back 2 weeks later, and the wall that had been cleaned with bleach was grown again, but the other wall was not. So never clean it with bleach. It creates an incredibly toxic mix, the combination of mould and bleach. But the $1 million question is, how do we get it out of the body? Number 1, starve. So what's its favourite food? That diet we looked at yesterday. high grain, high carbohydrate, high sugar, just feeds it. So what does the person eat? In my book, Self-Heal by Design, there's the antifungal diet, stage 1. In the antifungal diet, stage 1, it's very low sugar fruits like Granny Smith apples, grapefruit, no sweets other than maybe a little stevia. Stevia is a very mild sweetener. You don't need very much. One lady said, I'm not going to use stevia. I don't like stevia. I said, why not? She said, it's got a bitter aftertaste. I said, you use too much. It's hard to believe that 1/16 of a teaspoon equals 2 teaspoons of sugar. That's a bit hard to put your mind around that. So it's better to use a little less and keep tasting it. It's a lovely, delicate sweetener, but it will not feed fungus. So the person can ideally eat a lot of vegetables, a little bit of the low fruits, and there are some fruits that are very low in sweet. So that is tomato, because the classification of a fruit is it has its seed in it, which a tomato has, cucumber, zucchini, avocado. You call it squash. We call it mostly pumpkin. I think you call the big ones pumpkins, yeah? You know, you call it butternut squash. We call that butternut pumpkin. So anyway, same thing. So they're very low on sweet. Fruit is high in fibre, high in sugars, low in minerals. Whereas vegetables, they are high in fibre, high in minerals, low in sugars. So going more for the vegetables. Legumes, lentils, chickpeas, lima beans, black-eye beans. Also, the nuts, there's only one nut we don't advise, and that is the peanut, because peanuts are commonly contaminated with mould. In Queensland, because in Australia, the top of Australia is near the equator, so it's quite warm. The further down you go, the cooler it gets. So up in Queensland, there's a town that grows peanuts, and it's well known. It grows lots and lots of peanuts. I can't think of its name. Kenilworth. A lot of peanuts. It's the peanut capital of Australia. And we had a guest that said his friend did a thesis on mycotoxins, and he did it there because of such a fruitful ground of studying mycotoxins. You see, peanuts are a ground legume, and they tend to mould very easily. But if you are a lover of peanut butter, my suggestion is try almond butter, try cashew butter. There are so many other nut butters that you can use. And in his book, The China Study, it's a bestseller, Dr. Colin Campbell, he was asked to go to the Philippines because children were dying of liver cancer 8 to 10 years of age. Now, this is usually cancer that only really gets adults, and that alcoholics. And he found the common denominator was peanut butter. The mould was called aspergillus. And the mould waste that came off the aspergillus, the mycotoxin, is called aflatoxin. And aflatoxin directly affects liver. And in my study of this subject, I came across many authors. I spent thousands of dollars on these different books that talk about this because it really intrigued me. And that's why I wrote Self-Heal by Design, because I realised that so many people don't understand the danger of mould. So I've met some sick people who've been living in mouldy houses, not even realising that it's the mould. And we're going to go one step further, I think it's tomorrow, where we look at cancer, to have a look at the link between fungus and cancer. There's a strong link there. Does that mean fungus causes cancer? Well, not necessarily so, sometimes, in some cases, but in other cases, maybe not. That's why we're the doctor, because there's no one like us. And it's important to look at the history to link things together. We have seen so much sickness, and you can source it to mould exposure. That's why Doug Kaufman, he's written the Fungal Link Book 1, the Fungal Link Book 2, the Fungal Link Book 3, and he shows the link with fungus and so many diseases. So we need to look at the cell for a moment to understand this. Here's the cell. The glucose goes in, it goes through a 20-step pathway, which gives us 2 units of energy. The end result of that is the chemical form of glucose called pyruvate, and pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into the powerhouse of the cell, called the powerhouse of the cell because this 8-step pathway delivers an impressive 36 units of energy. This is the pathway that uses oxygen, no oxygen used up here. This is the pathway that fungus uses. And this explains why. I've had this happen to me twice. A lady came and said, my husband developed depression 6 months after moving into a mouldy house, because a lot of the brain cells are running up here, only giving 2 units of energy. And you can have 5 people living in a mouldy house. One will have sinus problems, another one will have asthma, another one will have chronic fatigue syndrome, because where are their cells running? Up here. Another one will have depression, another one will have eczema. Can you see how it can manifest itself differently in different people? It appears to manifest at most where our bodies are weakest. Maybe we've got a genetic weakness there, or maybe an environmental weakness there. Again, that's why you're the doctor, because if there's anything I have learned in my many years of helping people with health issues, is never to be absolute. Just when you think you're absolute, someone else comes along that totally disproves you wrong. It's like my first 4 children. I thought I knew everything about teaching children how to read, and then Peter hit. Whoa, threw everything out the window. Had to totally adjust for that. But this explains why you can link fungal exposure, mold exposure, with chronic fatigue syndrome. You can link it with depression. It's not the only cause of chronic fatigue syndrome. It's not the only cause of depression. But often it is a contributing link, because in the cell, that's where it's running. Not giving a lot of energy, whether it be brain or whether it be the rest of the body. So I have a formula that I use, and I find it a very good formula. History. You always look at the person's history. The symptoms tell you where to start. That's the body saying, excuse me, can you do something here? That's why I'm not in agreement with the way medicine just masks symptoms. The symptoms are there for a reason. They have a purpose. And then you apply a natural remedy and you watch the body's response. And the body's response will say, I like that. And if you're not better immediately, remember, it might take time. We all want to be better in a minute, but it takes longer. Might have taken 20 years to get sick, but it won't take 20 years to undo it, but it might take 6 months or a year. So when I say starve the fungus, absolutely dietary rise. Get those carbohydrates down. It doesn't mean carbohydrates are out. They're just not the main part of the diet, especially wheat, because it gets the sugar up. Starve also means assess whether you have exposure to fungus. Is there any mold? We have a series at home called Is Your House Killing You? And it was an SBS series. SBS, that's a television station in Australia. And we bought the DVDs of it, and there are 7 shows in the 2 DVDs. Is your house killing you? And I would say in 6 of the stories, it was mold. Mold in the house. And they get a team in to come in and assess the air. Sometimes it's a leaking tap. Sometimes it's something in the basement. Sometimes it's from the roof. It can be in many places.
Is all mold visible?
No, not all mold is visible, especially when it's behind the wall.
But I mean, like if you move, like if you dig for it, you'll see it. Like,
Yeah, and of course it's the last stage before the matter's brought back to dust. And that's why if there's mold on your pumpkin, throw it. Because it's all through. It's just the one you see, it's now to its reproductive stage. Because the dust that the mold gives off has a spore in it where it can grow other places, but it also, remember, has that toxic poison in, and that's what penicillin is. It can kill bacteria. Yes?
Like with vegetables, strawberries, if one's moldy, but there's some that aren't.
Yeah, if you got a packet of strawberries and one's mouldy, yeah, I'm very cautious about even what touches it.
Yeah.
And it's hard when you've grown the pumpkin to have to throw the pumpkin out. But that's why compost bins are good. You just throw it in the compost bin and you're getting the microorganisms out of it. But it's very important to stop. And when you realised that they're opportunist organisms, they're going to feed where they have a lot of waste. They're going to feed where there's damage. So exposure to chemicals must stop because chemicals damage the tissues and they can start growing from that. So starve means turning the tap off. Number 2, kill. I do think we've got to get away from the kill mentality, but there are herbs that will kill fungus and will not kill you. Isn't that good news? One is garlic. I think that's a well-known one. If you can't handle raw garlic, because raw garlic is the most potent, get a bowl of hot soup and crush it into the hot soup. It'll just take the edge off. Or mash up avocado and mix it through that. So there are ways that you can take it. Another one is olive leaf extract. That has a strong fungal killer component in it. And one that's fairly common here, more common than it is in Australia, grapefruit seed extract. Have you ever eaten a grapefruit and bitten the seed? You'll think the grapefruit's sweet when you bite the seed. It is so bitter, but that's cheap medicine. Eat a grapefruit a day and eat all the seeds.
Would grapefruit essential oil be bad?
Grapefruit, it must be grapefruit seed. Grapefruit seed. It's not in the grapefruit, it's in the grapefruit seed. And don't get confused with grape seed oil. No, this is grapefruit seed extract. And so to take that, you might take 5 drops in a little water 3 times a day. Another one is oregano. You call it oregano, yeah? So oregano essential oil, that is very strong. So you might put a drop in a bit of water and throw that down. And you might do that 3 times a day. Some people are even brave enough to build up to 3 drops in a little water 3 times a day. Now notice how these microorganisms adapt and adjust. And the reason why golden staph has happened is because bacteria has had so much antibiotics thrown at it, excuse me, that a lot of it was killed, but some of it adapt and adjust so that the next antibiotic doesn't touch it. And that's how the golden staph developed. So understanding these microorganisms' ability to adapt and adjust, we don't allow them time to adapt and adjust to the herbs. So I suggest a week on garlic, then stop. A week on grapefruit seed extract, then stop. A week on olive leaf extract, then stop. A week on oregano essential oil. Another good one is Portiaco. In my book, Self-Heal by Design, I have listed them. So you can see why you keep adapting and adjusting. It's one thing to turn the tap off and starve dietary-wise and environment-wise, but come in with the kill. And these herbs will not kill the good guys. Remember herbs? Psalm 104 verse 14, God gave herbs for the service of man. So the herbs come in and work with your body, yes? What about fresh oregano? You'd probably have to take a cup 3 times a day. You see, it's very concentrated in that form. I must be losing my voice again.
Would the hot-cold method work if you had the wound with the staph, or would that not help? You would have to go to the herbs.
No, the hot and cold would help. Depends where it is. If it was in a toe, I'd definitely do the alternating hot and colds. Because remember, the contrast bars, the hot and cold, you're moving blood. And the blood is the life of the flesh. The blood is the carrier. And these microorganisms, these pathogenic, the fungal, they can't survive in the presence of oxygen. And so that's why getting the blood to the area is also important. Depends where it is, depends what you can do. Third is to restore the balance. How do we restore the balance? Restore the balance in the gastrointestinal tract with probiotics. Probiotics, just as antibiotic means against life, probiotic is for life. Especially if someone has taken antibiotics, they need to go on a probiotic every morning for at least 2 months. Yes, that's how long it can take. You can get probiotic powders, and they're best taken 3/4 of an hour before breakfast, or an hour before breakfast. So it goes down to your small intestine. Because remember, in the morning, the little valve at the bottom of your stomach is open, so you want to take it straight through. Your hydrochloric acid doesn't start to be released until you see, smell, start to eat food. But in our next class, that's what we're going to be looking at. So you can get probiotic powders, but it's a good idea to include probiotics as part of your daily food. That's sauerkraut, kombucha, kefir, yogurts, and if you're plant-based, you can get some nice plant-based yogurts. I've had a very nice cashew yogurt. You can make yogurt on any type of milk, coconut yogurt. You can also do water kefir. I used to do water kefir for many years before I started traveling so much, and it's very nice. So those cultured foods are putting Lactobacillus acidophilus into your gut. And traditionally, there was always a cultured food as part of the dietary program. What about sourdough bread? Well, it's baked, so it kills the microorganisms. But when you eat sourdough bread, that culturing process, it breaks down the protein or the gluten in the grain, so you're eating a pre-digested grain. And that's why when you are on this antifungal stage 1 program, no yeast bread, no yeasts and no refined sugars. So my suggestion is for the stage 1, that the stage 1 for 2 months, and then stage 2 antifungal program, which is in my book, Self-Heal by Design. The only real difference is to now include some low glycemic fruits like berries. So all your berries can be introduced there, and I'll put a question mark there. It's until the symptoms go. One lady said all her symptoms were gone in 6 weeks. One lady said all her symptoms were gone in 18 months. Now, she'd suffered for 30 years. She'd have fungal infections in her private parts, in between her toes, on and off. She'd take the doctor's drugs and it'd ease, but it'd always come back because remember, drugs never cure disease. And so then she got really ill, and her naturopath put her on a very strict stage 1 diet, and she was on that for 18 months. And after 18 months, she moved over to the stage 2, and I was talking to her recently. It is now 15 years later. She said it's the best thing she ever did because it freed her from those terrible complaints. She said her poor husband was not happy because she so often was unable to be intimate with him because of this problem she had. And she said, it's the best thing that I ever did was to go on that. She went on that program, I think, when she was early 50s, and she'd been plagued with this since her 20s. But some people find that the symptoms are gone in 6 weeks. If they come back after 6 weeks, just go back on it. It just means, remember what you're doing, you're watching. Part of being your own doctor is to listen. Your body can tell you what no man can tell you. Your body can tell you what no test can tell you. But it's important to listen. because the body will tell you if it doesn't like it. That's why if you have an injury, listen, don't start working it too early. We're going to have a break now, and after the break, we're going to go on that very exciting journey through the gastrointestinal tract. So welcome back, everyone. I need a whistler. Oh, cooey, cooey. So welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, welcome back. Oh, she's got a good voice. I was looking for a whistler. In fact, at one place I had, there was this guy, and he could whistle so loud, and I'd just look at him and go like that, and he'd whistle, and we had quiet. But I understand it's very exciting information, and that's why I never tire of presenting it, because it is very exciting to know the truth. And remember 2 Corinthians 13 verse 8, the Bible says you can do nothing against the truth, only for the truth. They can throw mud at the truth, they can burn it, they can flood it, but you can't change truth. And that's what I present to you is truth. Now we're going to have a look at the truth on the gastrointestinal tract. It's a very interesting journey, and it's a very misunderstood journey. The Bible says in Proverbs 14 verse 6, knowledge is easy to him that understands. My aim is to give you an understanding of your gastrointestinal tract, because when you have an understanding of how it works, you automatically have the knowledge on how to treat it. So I've drawn a picture up here of you. This is a picture of you. The gastrointestinal tract, and we've touched on this a couple of times, it's a hollow tube. That means it's an external environment. Anything that goes in there is not part of you or me until it gets broken down to tiny substances, then absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. Then it becomes part of you and me, because then it becomes part of the life of the flesh. Leviticus 17:11, the life of the blood is in the flesh. You may never have looked at the Bible as a medical book. It is, because the creator of this human body is the author of that book. And there are so many little interesting principles in there that talk about the body and its healing power. So we begin at the mouth. It's a long journey. It's about 10 meters long. You would say 10 yards long. And ideally, the travel time should be no longer than 24 hours. Ideally, it should be about a 16-hour journey. But the mouth is the only part that we have say over. And the choices we make in the mouth affect the whole of the gastrointestinal tract, all the way down. Number one, we have say over what goes in. Is it the best organic food we can buy, prepared in the best manner, high fibre, great proteins and fats, or is it devitalized food? We choose. Number two, we choose how long it stays in the mouth. Is it chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow? Or is it knife and fork goes down and we chew, chew, chew? My husband Michael does everything fast. And it's one thing I like about him. He's a mover and a shaker. He drives very fast, and I don't mind because I like fast. And he just loved it when we were in Germany, 250 kilometres an hour on the Autobahn. Very exciting. But he does something else fast, eat. Sometimes he just eats too fast. He's got a lot on his plate. He's got things to do. And when he's eating a little too fast, I just touch his arm and smile. And he goes, puts the knife and fork down. And he tries very hard to eat slowly because there are no teeth in the stomach. This is the only place we have the ability to chew. Chew, chew, chew. And a great little game you can play with the kids, especially if they eat too fast, is the steam train game. Chew, 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 chew. And count to 30. Let's try and do 30 chews. How many chews did you get to? because the third point is no controversial issues discussed at the table. So if a child has got their elbows on the table or they're making a mess, I say, stop making a mess, stop, eat too fast, you're eating too fast, blah, 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 blah. No one can digest that meal. But what you can do is after the meal, take the child aside and say, sweetheart, we're going to try a few new things at the table because I love you so much and I want you to get the most out of your food. And deal with it then. I remember my stepdaughter, Michaela, when I first became a mother, I knew I had to tread carefully. And I used to make this beautiful spread to put on the bread. And she'd put so much on, it was bigger than the bread. But I know if I said anything at the table, I would embarrass her, especially in front of her brothers. Her brothers, who are, of course, always looking for something that they can get the girls on. So after the meal, I said, sweetheart, you're overdoing a little on the spread. And she looked at me and she said, thank you for not saying that at the table. You know, it's important to be very mindful of the minds of the children. But I certainly would not let the children throw food. I would not let in fact, if a child said yuck at my table, it meant they had to immediately leave the table. Because that's not said. I said, if I put manure on your plate, that would be yuck. But it's not. And you know, the Bible says, train up the children in the way they should go. If left to themselves, their manners are atrocious. And I know my daughter, her children cannot leave the table until they say, thank you so much for this beautiful meal, Mother. Can I leave now? And she says, why, certainly. Just teaching them those manners is very, very important. So no controversial issues at the table. So what goes in, how long it stays in, no controversy at the table because that can inhibit the release of the digestive enzymes. Also, how much goes in? Is it 5 platefuls of food or is it a reasonable amount of food? And when we get to the stomach, you will discover that when we overload the stomach, it cannot digest properly. How many people feel like eating an evening meal on the 25th of December? Not many, because the main meal was usually bigger and richer than usual. And the last one is, the fifth choice is we have say over how often the food goes in. Is it every 2 hours? Is it every half hour? Or is it just at meal times? And as we will discover as we get into the stomach, that greatly affects the functioning of the stomach. So we need to chew, chew, chew. You might have heard the old saying, we should drink our food and we should chew our drinks and drink our food. What does that mean? When our guests are on the fasting days at Misty Mountain, we get them to take the juice in, a mouthful, and swish it around a little bit, and then swallow it, and it warms it a little, making it ready for the stomach. So how do we drink our food? We chew it till it's just about a cream. And then we swallow it in. And the swallowing is an amazing process. So many things that we take for granted in our human body. When we swallow, we close our trachea, which goes into our lungs, and we open the esophagus. It's a muscular contraction. And when we swallow, that muscular contraction causes the esophagus to also contract, which takes the food down, and then it comes to another muscle, which is the cardiac sphincter. The cardiac sphincter is the muscle that's like a little gateway from the esophagus into our stomach. It's a muscle. So when it's relaxed, it's closed. When it tightens, it opens to let the food in. But there's a condition that many people have today called reflux or heartburn. And if someone says to me, I've got too much acid in my stomach, I say, how do you know? They say, it keeps coming up. The problem's not the acid. The problem is the gate. The gate should be closed. Well, why is it open? Maybe the person's stressed out, and stressing out means that the muscles tighten and that can open. Eating all day long overworks the little cardiac sphincter. Drinking with the meal dilutes the acid in the stomach, which actually can cause fermentation, and also eating the largest meal at the end of the day. When we eat the largest meal at the end of the day, when we lie down to go to sleep, gravity pushes against that cardiac sphincter, weakening it. Unfortunately, if people have heartburn or reflux, they're often given antacids. Is that right? Proton pump inhibitors, which stop the acid. Well, that makes absolutely no sense to me at all. That's like shooting the cows because they keep getting into the vegetable garden. Just shut the gate. No need to shoot the acid. We need it, as you will see when we get into the stomach, to break our protein down. No, we need a nice strong acid. The problem's the gate. So how do you fix the gate? You have breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and if you eat at night, it should be maybe just a bowl of soup or maybe a banana, something very light. And take magnesium. Magnesium is the ultimate muscle relaxant. And remember that little gate, when it's relaxed, it's closed. But let's go back to the mouth for a minute, because most people don't realize that digestion begins in the mouth, not just the chewing, but there are some breakdowns that happen in the mouth. The mouth is an alkaline environment, and there is an enzyme that's released underneath the tongue from the sublingual glands called lingual lipase. And lingual lipase is the enzyme that breaks down saturated fat. Saturated fat is a unique fat. It's a unique fat in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. As we will find out as we go on our journey, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, their breakdown happens further down. No, the saturated fat is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth under the action of lingual lipase, which is released from the sublingual gland underneath the tongue. What is saturated fat? Butter, ghee, coconut oil, palm oil. I know in macadamia nuts there can be some saturated fats. And we have touched on the fact that saturated fat is not the enemy, which we were told in the 1890s and even the early 2000s. No, it's actually an amazing fat, and it does not cause heart disease. It didn't cause heart disease in the South Pacific Islanders who've been using it for centuries, and it doesn't cause it now, as we will see tonight. I think tonight's heart, yes. The other food that begins its breakdown in the mouth is starch, or carbohydrates, predominantly our grains, and that happens under the action of a salivary amylase called ptyalin. And ptyalin is the enzyme that breaks down starch. But ptyalin is in very small amounts in the mouth of a baby. Well, they don't need it. They're just having milk. But the ptyalin in the baby's mouth is not released until the molars are through. See, the first teeth are the 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom, and they're called milk teeth, because that should be baby's main food is milk. There's also taste time. I'd give my little ones a piece of cucumber, sometimes a piece of celery, sometimes a piece of apple. It's taste time. Just give them one a meal. They're finding out the taste, the texture, and it's very good for their gums, gnawing away on it. I was reading one dentist, and he claims that one of the worst things you can give a little baby is soft food, because they don't learn to chew. A lot of people are scared because they'll choke. They don't choke, they gag. Gagging is out it pops. Don't worry about it. Don't bother them. Choking is totally different. A child that never had crunchy food, and you give them the crunchy food when they're 3 and they don't know how to chew and a great big lump goes down and that they're silent. That's the choking. So that's what we should give our baby. So what's happening today in pediatrics? Women have been told they must give their baby cereal. Rice cereal, I see some nods, at 4 to 6 months of age. Am I right, mothers? So why do they tell you that? When the baby has, usually teeth don't come till about 7 months. Baby hasn't even got any teeth. Baby can't sit. That defies reason for me. You know, there's been a death. No one attended the funeral. No one knew he died. It was the death of common sense. Isn't that true? So why do mothers do it? Psalm 146 verse 3, put not your trust in princes. The authorities in the field, the princes in the field are saying to mothers there's not enough iron in breast milk in the second 6 months. So you've got to give your baby cereal or your baby won't develop properly, your baby's brain won't develop properly. So many mothers do it because of this. Well, I am here to dissipate fear. We should never make a decision on fear. And what did God say in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7? I've not given you the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Have you seen how much a baby grows in the first 6 months? Compared to how much a baby grows in the second 6 months? They literally explode in the first 6 months. Do you know what that means? Their iron levels or their iron demands are greater in the first 6 months than the second 6 months. God doesn't make mistakes. That content of iron in the second 6 months in breast milk is perfect. It's perfect. You see, it's not rocket science. The baby's demands for iron aren't as great in the second 6 months. Now, I heard and I read, I was told by a nurse in one of Australia's biggest hospitals, Children's Hospital, Camperdown Children's Hospital, and he told me that he's in charge of the malabsorption syndrome ward, and it was full of babies given starch too young. I was only 23, I'd never heard of such a thing. He said the ptyalin is not present in the mouth, well, in amounts necessary to break down cereal until the molars are through. And when the molars through, what do? Grind. What do we grind? Grain. And so don't give the baby starch until the molars are through. My son James, built like this, he was not interested in food till he was 16 months of age. So 16 months of age, running around, little toddler, doesn't eat food. Do you know that was normal 200, 500, 1,000 years ago? That was normal. And yet the mother's told your baby will not develop. Well, let's do an assessment on James. He's in his 40s now, he's a master builder, so he's smart. He's a brilliant musician on the panpipes, doesn't even need music. He's an incredible artist. He looks like a bodybuilder. No, he hasn't suffered. He hasn't suffered. Now let's go back to the generation that weren't given food as babies. Out of that generation came Nikola Tesla, Einstein, Rembrandt, Galileo. Wow, the geniuses. No. Milk is perfect for that baby at every single stage. And when the dentists are saying the gums and the teeth aren't developing properly because the little ones aren't chewing, they say we need to eat more crunchy food, more crunchy food. That's why if my little 2 or 3-year-old grandson comes and says, I'm hungry, and breakfast isn't quite ready, you know what I do? Give him an apple. I don't peel it. I don't core it. He'll work it out. Is that right? In fact, I think we've got too many helicopter parents and too many helicopter grandparents. What does a helicopter do? Hover, hover, hover. Child can't even think. Can't even think. Let him go. Let him go. Give them the apple. And if it's nearly lunchtime and they're hungry and lunch isn't quite ready, you know what I give them? A carrot. No, I don't peel or do anything to that. And you know, it takes them a while. So by the time lunch is ready, they've only eaten half a carrot. If I give them a sandwich, they're not going to want to eat lunch. So they're the two foods that breakdown begins in the mouth. We're coming down into the stomach now, and the stomach is the only part of the whole body that is acid or should be acid. It's an acid environment. And that acid environment is very important, as we will see. Lining the stomach are big folds. And these big folds are lined with gastric glands. And these gastric glands, 2/3 of them, release mucus. And the reason for that is that it gives a lovely coating because of what's about to be released down here. And the parietal glands are released hydrochloric acid. 1 drop of hydrochloric acid would burn a hole in your skin. So you can see why God put the thick mucus lining there. 1 glass of water half an hour before your meal will thicken that mucosa lining. Also is released pepsinogen. And pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid unite, and they release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. It wasn't released there, otherwise it might start eating your stomach lining. So hydrochloric acid's very important because this connection can only happen in an acid environment, and pepsin can only work in an acid environment. So it's very important to keep water to between meals. So we should stop drinking water about a half an hour before the meal and resume about an hour and a half after the meal. That's why I say to mothers and grandparents, get your children drinking as soon as they wake up. I was talking to a lady recently and she said, my little one doesn't want to drink water. Well, my last one, who was terrible on water, but I breastfed him till he was 3. So, of course, he'd want to feed in the morning and I'd say, when you've had your water, them the rules. If you've got rules, keep to those rules. Anyway, he'd have his water, then he could have his feed. But I remember when he got even older, at 4, he's not fed anymore, I used to read him stories in the morning and I would only turn the page if he had a mouthful of water. And he's eager to see what's the next stage, water. See, the best way to teach children is cause and effect. The best way to teach children is there's a consequence for every action. But please work that out before you present it. Because if you say something, you got to go with it. If you threaten and don't carry through with it, you're basically teaching a child to lie. That's a bit strong. Well, I'm just concerned today. I see so many children, they don't even know where they stand because the parents, I think it's called gentle parenting. I'm all for gentle parenting because I'm against violence, but you know what? That gentleness must also come in with justice and consequences. Yes, we must never be violent to our children. Always be gentle, but firm. The beautiful way God deals with us. Gently, but there's consequences. So look after the stomach. If a person is thirsty after their meal, by all means have a mouthful. A mouthful's not going to greatly dilute. But if you sit to the meal well hydrated, you will not need to drink with your meals. How long does digestion take? Well, there's been a lot of research done on this, and I've read quite a few books that show this, that digestion takes between 3.5 to 4 hours. Obviously, not watermelon. Watermelon is a lot quicker, but a meal that has the 3 essentials, and the 3 essential food groups are fibre. Fibre slowly releases the glucose. Protein, it's in the stomach that protein's broken down. So when protein is part of our daily food, then it'll keep the food in the stomach a little longer, and fats coat the food so it takes a little longer to break down. Then the stomach loves a rest of at least 1 hour. So what does that equal? That can equal 5 to 6 hours between a meal. And that brings us to what we've touched on a couple of times, which is time-restricted eating. Time-restricted eating came out of the 5-2 diet, the intermittent fasting, eating twice, 6 hours apart in a 24-hour period. And that gives also a very easy fast, because when you're fasting, you're asleep. Now, this may not work with everyone. That's why you're the doctor there. One lady told me that how she did it, when the kids came home from school, off the school bus, she had the main meal ready. Are they hungry then? Is the Pope a Catholic? They're starving. So give them a really good breakfast. Maybe give them an orange for lunch. They're not interested to eat at lunchtime because they want to play with their friends, and then have that main meal ready when they get home. And that works very well. And one lady said it works so well. She said, my husband comes home at 6, he's tired. I warm up some food for him and he's happy for the peace. Kids are happy, they're being fed. So you've just got to do what works for you. I know my boys, because they're tradesmen, some of them are having breakfast at 6:30 in the morning. Well, they're working physically hard. They want something to eat at midday, and then they'll need something to eat maybe 6 o'clock. So it just depends on you, depends on your lifestyle, your activities, your family's activities through the day. But the stomach, under the action of pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid, release pepsin, and pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. And that can only happen in a very acid stomach. And that's why if someone says, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, great, you must be digesting your meal very, very well, because we need that acid. I have never met anyone with too much acid, but I have met many with not enough. How would you know? Bloating's one sign, because the food's just not getting broken down. Feeling like you've just eaten a meal and it's 4 or 5 hours later, that also can be another sign. How would you boost hydrochloric acid? You can boost hydrochloric acid by taking the juice of a lemon just before the meal. You can boost it by taking 1/3 of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper in a little bit of warm water just before the meal, or 1/4 of a cup of hot ginger tea. That can help. That's your sweet bitter. But starting to eat the main meals at breakfast and lunch, that makes a huge difference. And just if you eat at night, eating lightly at night. See, when we lay down to sleep, our stomach wants to sleep. But if we've eaten a big meal, stomach cannot sleep. And the person wakes up, they don't feel like breakfast. In fact, the breath is bad because the poor old stomach was trying to work at this meal. And then they say, right, I'm going to lose weight today. So they don't have breakfast. They grab a quick lunch. What's the appetite like by the end of the day? Huge. And the vicious cycle just begins. The best way to lose weight is to prevent hunger. How do you prevent hunger? Have breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and supper like a pauper. And go to bed early. If you stay awake till 11, you're going to get hungry. The bottom of the stomach has a little valve called the pyloric sphincter. And when we wake up in the morning, the pyloric sphincter is open. That's the best time to drink the water. And ideally, warm water, maybe with a little squeeze of lemon. I try and drink at least 3 glasses of water before breakfast. But I wake at 5 and I eat at 7, so I can easily get that much water in. The pyloric sphincter has sensors, and it can tell if the food's broken down. And so probably after about 2 hours it starts to open, but doesn't it take 3.5 to 4 hours? That's for the whole food to be digested. And little by little bits come in. And let's say at 10 o'clock, the person has a biscuit, or you call it a cookie, maybe a croissant, maybe a sandwich, or maybe they're really healthy and it's an apple and a handful of nuts. Whatever it is, pyloric sphincter shuts, because it picks up that something's just come in that's not broken down. And remember, little by little the food comes out, and maybe that's breakfast. And so it stays shut until this newcomer is broken down and joins here. Then it'll open, and little by little more goes through. And then lunch comes in. Shut the gate, something's just come in, it's not broken down. What they have found is remnants of breakfast in the stomach at the end of the day when people are eating every couple of hours. When I was in Andalusia, the northern part of southern Spain, I stayed with a family in this beautiful big stone house, and they had 4 children, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, and 9-year-old. And these 4 children ate 2 meals a day. Now, most people think you can't do this to children, but I raised my children that way. But the little one, you'll think, how can they go the distance? Well, they're usually going down for a sleep at maybe 11 or 12 o'clock. And what this family did, they had their breakfast 8:30 or 9, and then they'd have their main meal at about 2:30 or 3. Now, these children weren't skinny, they weren't overweight, they were just great size, and they were happy children. They were golden brown because they're running outside most of the day. But you must feed them well. Like the meal I showed last night. I don't hear from my grandchildren when I feed them well. If they have half a bowl of cereal and run off, well, obviously you're going to have trouble a couple of hours later. Now, I never allowed my children to act out at the table. And my fifth child, Peter, if the banana fell into his honey on his porridge, he'd cry. And if the spoon went the wrong way in the porridge, he'd cry. And the rule is, if you cry, you have to go out. So he'd have to go out on the veranda. If it's freezing outside, he'd go into the bathroom. And then I'd open the door after 5 minutes and say, are you going to be a good boy now? No. Okay, shut the door and make breakfast. 5 minutes later, are you going to be a good boy now? Oh, come back. You're always pleasant, because when you are pleasant, you are teaching the children how to behave. But I remember one day, I think 5 times he had to leave, so not a lot of breakfast got eaten. And you know what I think? I'm going to have trouble. He's 3. So we have our main meal at 2. And at 12 o'clock, Mum, I'm hungry. Now, I don't say, well, you should have eaten your breakfast, because that's obvious. They're not idiots. You're implying they're idiots when you say that. And you say, have you had water? How much water have you had? And he shows me his bottle. Yes, he's had a lot of water. And I say, okay, if you sit on that chair very still, you can have a little cup of organic soy milk, which is a huge treat. Now, that will just coat their stomachs a little bit, and off he goes happy. And then he comes at 1:30, I'm hungry. Okay, if you sit very still on that chair, you can have a carrot. Takes them a long time to get through a carrot. And you make out it's a great honour. So that's what I do. I would not feed them between meals, because I know if I feed them between meals, then they're not going to want their lunch. And if they don't have much lunch, then we're going to have trouble a couple of hours later. You've got to think ahead. You've got to think for them. But also remember that children often say they're hungry when they're bored. So that's what we did. And I remember one day Peter, he's 15 now, well, he's 40 now, but this story is when he's 15. He said, Mum, the water's not doing it anymore. And I said, great, it's lunchtime. And that's what you find if you get a hunger pang between meals, have water. Because if the water doesn't do it, it usually is hunger. True hunger. So now we move down to the duodenum. And the duodenum is a very busy place in digestion. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. And you'll notice to the right we have the liver, and underneath the liver is the gallbladder. And the gallbladder is a reservoir. The gallbladder is a reservoir that holds bile. But it is the liver that makes the bile. So if you've had your gallbladder taken out, the good news is it's your liver that makes the bile. So you still can digest your fats. So the liver releases bile, and bile is the enzyme that emulsifies unsaturated fat. It emulsifies it down to tiny particles. That's what the liver does. But notice on the left, we've got the pancreas. And the pancreas releases sodium bicarbonate. Why does the pancreas release sodium bicarbonate? Because in the duodenum, it's an alkaline environment. And what's coming out of the stomach is acid. And so the pancreas releases sodium bicarbonate that'll bring that area, that first part of the small intestine, back to alkaline. The pancreas also releases pancreatic lipase, and pancreatic lipase further breaks down the unsaturated fat. Remember, the saturated fat, the breakdown began in the mouth, but the unsaturated fat, its breakdown happens in the duodenum under the action of first the bile to emulsify the fats, and then pancreatic lipase to further break it down. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Now, do you remember in the mouth, salivary amylase called ptyalin started starch digestion? And that starch digestion continued for about, they maintain about 15 minutes in the stomach before it's infiltrated with the acid and the breakdown stops. And then it comes into the duodenum, and under the action of pancreatic amylase, starch digestion is finalized. That's why it's important to chew your starches, your breads, your cereals, your pastas. Because if you don't chew them very well, starch digestion may not have barely begun, and that puts a bigger load on the pancreas, which releases pancreatic amylase. The pancreas also releases the trypsin brothers. Who are the trypsin brothers? I think it's just easier to say trypsin brothers because it's trypsin and chymotrypsin. And what the trypsin brothers do, they finalize protein digestion. Protein digestion began in the mouth. No, it began in the stomach under the action of pepsin, and then it's finalized in the duodenum under the action of the trypsin brothers. So let me give you an illustration. Here's protein, and when that protein comes into the stomach, pepsin breaks the protein down to peptides and polypeptides. The peptides and the polypeptides come into the small intestine, and under the action of the trypsin brothers, peptides are broken down to amino acid, and polypeptides are broken down to peptides and amino acids, and then amino acids. You see, it's only these singular structures that can be absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. So now we come to the grand finale of digestion, which is the small intestine. Our nutrients are absorbed halfway down our small intestine. Our small intestine is lined with villi. We touched on this when we looked at our immune system last night. And the villi have microvilli on them. And it is estimated that that makes up about 7 kilometres of surface area. Up the middle of the villi is the lacteal, and that's part of the lymphatic system, and that's where the unsaturated fat, when it has its breakdown, it's absorbed into the I think she wants me.
Distracted you, sorry.
Righto. So we looked at the villi last night when we looked at the immune system. And right up the middle of the villi is the lacteal. That's part of the lymphatic system. Most people don't realise the unsaturated fats, they're absorbed straight into the lymphatic system. Whereas not the saturated fat, it's absorbed straight into the blood. Another reason why the saturated fat is actually the easiest fat to digest. So in a minute, when I'm free, thank you, my dear, I'm going to draw the blood capillary system. And remember, anything that goes into that gastrointestinal tract is not part of you or me till it gets broken down to these tiny substances and then absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. And lining is our microbiome. We've talked about our microbiome a few times, how important it is. Made up predominantly of Lactobacillus acidophilus, bifidus bacterium. They're the two permanent bacteria that live in our gastrointestinal tract. Many, many others are made from that. And this microbiome, this friendly or healthy bacteria, it's responsible for the final breakdown of our food. And you might say, well, Barbara, we've just looked at all of these enzymes that break the food down. What does the microbiome do? What the microbiome does, it causes a release of B vitamins. And did you know that when our B vitamins are working well and we've got adequate amounts, it can prevent Alzheimer's? That makes them very attractive. But this microbiome is responsible for the release of the B vitamins from our foods. Also, the microbiome causes a release of melatonin. On the first night, we looked at the importance of sleeping 8 hours a night. We looked at the importance of grabbing those hours before midnight because that's when melatonin is the most active. And melatonin is the hormone released especially in those earlier parts of the night that's responsible for increasing healing. But it is our microbiome that causes a release of the melatonin. The microbiome are also causing a release of glutathione. Glutathione is being hailed as the most potent antioxidant. I don't take B vitamins, I don't take melatonin, I don't take glutathione, but you know what I do? I make sure I give my body the best conditions so that my gut flora is thriving. There's a book called The Plant Paradox by Dr. Stephen Gundry. You may have heard of it. He maintains we should all be on a carnivore diet because vegetables and legumes and grains are so high in lectins. You've heard of lectins. But did you know that if your gut flora is as it should be, it disarms lectins? Isn't that good news? And as long as you rinse and cook your legumes well and make your grains into sourdough bread and chew very well, we do not need to fear lectins. So as long as we are cooking our grains and our legumes in the traditional way and ensuring we've got nice, strong gut flora, it will disarm any lectins that might slip through. The gut flora is also responsible for the absorption of our nutrients out of our gut and into the blood. The gut flora, we looked at this last night, it protects the blood against any harmful pathogens, and the gut flora also plays an important role in nourishing the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. Hippocrates, he said all disease begins in the gut, and he didn't know the detail of what I have shown you today. In fact, microbiome and gut flora is a hot topic it's probably just the last 15, maybe 20 years. It's received a lot of attention. So now I want to show you how you can boost your gut flora, because antibiotics break it down, statin drugs, all your cholesterol-lowering medication breaks it down, long-term painkiller use break it down, overload of refined sugar can help to break it down by boosting too much of the yeast, because remember, our body runs according to precision balance, so the balance is vital. So how can we restore that? We can restore it with probiotic. Your probiotic foods are foods that are cultured foods. So in Asia, a popular one is miso. Miso is a nice additive to make your soup nice and rich near the end of cooking. Also sauerkraut. We were in Germany earlier in the year. We had some delicious sauerkraut, not hard to make it. Now's a good time to make your sauerkraut because you're going into winter. And Germans always did it as a way to preserve their cabbages, but also it's a great probiotic food. Yogurts, kefirs, kombucha, kimchi, there's lots of great cultured foods that you can use. And it is the prebiotics that feed the probiotics. So what are prebiotics? It's fiber. The more fiber we have, the more microorganisms are fed. And we should be having at least 7 different types of fiber every meal. There's no fiber in meat, there's no fiber in dairy. It's all in plants. So I'm going to go through my lunch yesterday and we're going to count the fiber. So I had spinach leaves, I had olives, had tomatoes, avocado, had potato, had sweet potato, had broccoli, had cauliflower, had black-eyed peas, you call them, and I think there was onion. 10 different fibers. Try and aim for at least 7 different fibers every meal. You can have 10 different apples and every apple will feed a different microorganism. You can have 10 different grapes and every grape will feed a different microorganism. Isn't that incredible? So when a person's eating cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, pasta for tea, cookies, pretzels, donuts, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, 1 fiber. And it's the hybridized wheat. And there's no fiber in refined sugar. So microbiomes aren't working well in many people today because of taking drugs, whether it be medicinal, whether it be recreational, or whether it be legal or illegal, not having enough fiber, not enough fruits and vegetables for their microbiome. And remember that those microorganisms that are in the soil that are causing the release of the nutrients out of the soil and into the blood of the plant, which is green blood, chlorophyll, a very similar thing is happening in our gastrointestinal tract. All that should be left from now on is insoluble fiber. I was reading an article by one supposedly health writer that says, useless, insoluble fibers, useless. I thought, well, he doesn't know much about the gastrointestinal tract, because what the fiber does is it keeps this colon regular. It stimulates peristalsis. And that fiber cleans out, sweeps. We need to sweep our colon every day, and that's what fiber does. It sweeps out all of these little corners. But when it comes through the ileocecal valve, which is a little valve at the end of the small intestine, it's liquid. So one of the main functions of the colon is to take water out so stools are formed, so we can pass with ease. What the colon needs is that insoluble fiber to keep that movement through the colon. Dr. Kellogg, famous doctor who wrote many books on health, he said 3 intakes of food a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. And if you notice that the colon has a mind of its own, if you tell it to go, it won't, and if you tell it to stop, it won't. And there are some, in fact, we've had some guests, they go once a week, twice a week. And if they talk to their colon doesn't respond. The colon needs gentle stimulation. What's the gentle stimulation? The gentle stimulation is fibre. The gentle stimulation is water. In a dehydrated colon, that's when rabbit pellets and cement can develop. Exercise. Exercise stimulates the colon, and it also increases blood supply to the colon. We've been learning about the importance of keeping the core strong. And core exercises, and remember that takes in thighs and hips, this whole area. It not only helps us to digest our food better and keep our cardiac sphincter strong, but it also is massaging gently and stimulating the colon. So these are very important. And also laughter. You know, the Bible says in Proverbs 22:17, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. Broken spirit dries up the colon. Sorry, it's Proverbs 17:22. Got that one mixed around. Leviticus 17:11, the life of the flesh is in the blood, but Proverbs 17:22 is a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. Relax more. Children laugh 125 times a day, so should we. That's why when you're encouraging the children into drinking more water and eating more fruits and vegetables, keep it light, laugh a lot, make it a game. And you'll be able to get a lot further with all of that. But what if you're doing all this and still the colon is only going once every 2 days? In my book, Sustain Me, there's a whole chapter on the colon, and it talks about colon tea. I think Ricky sells that in the shop at officialbarbaro'Neill.com. If you go to officialbarbaro'Neill.com, you can order the colon tea, and it has a mix of herbs in it. When this tea is taken every day, little by little, it trains the colon back into regularity. But what if it's going too much? It's called irritable bowel, called Crohn's disease, called colitis. Whatever it is called, got that? Whatever it is called, you know there's a problem, because we've had guests bleeding from the colon, cramping, and just diarrhea. Well, there are 5 herbs that act like kerosene to a fire on an inflamed colon. One is wheat. The hybridization created a protein or gluten structure very difficult for the gut to break down. Oats are high in that plant chemical called lectins. So that's why with an inflamed gut, my suggestion is initially to stop. And dairy and peanuts. We looked at the dangers of peanuts. I think my voice has gone quiet. And refined sugar. Refined sugar acts like kerosene to a fire on an inflamed gut. I can just stand there because I'm nearly finished. Let me see. So we have seen many people totally heal from this. Crohn's disease, people are told it's an autoimmune disease. Do you know, we've seen people totally heal from that. So it's a matter of stopping what inflames. Does that mean that person can never eat that again? No. Once their gut is healed, maybe they can eat a little bit now and then. Who will tell them? Their body will quickly tell them. But we find when these foods are stopped, and it's so easy to get replacements today. The simple needs bread is a great alternative. Millet or rice or buckwheat can be used as porridge. You can have organic soy milk or almond milk. You can have almond butter or cashew butter, or you might have to come to Australia to get macadamia butter. But there are other butters you can use. There's maple syrup and honey for the sweeteners. But it's important to listen, because what happens, and we've seen it, people are put on prednisone, they're put on anti-inflammatories, and I've seen it many times, and still they're bleeding. It's not quite as bad on the drugs, and then eventually they just take the colon out. But there is no need. There is no need. The herb that can be taken to slow things down and also to cause healing in the colon is slippery elm. Slippery elm coats, soothes and heals the lining of the gut. If someone's got diarrhea 10 times a day, well, they can take it every 2 hours. And then as it slows down, you back off it a little bit, maybe go to 4 times a day. So it's important to listen. And if someone has a flare-up, and stress can cause that, I suggest just go to thick vegetable stews and take the slippery elm every 2 hours until it settles right down. Also, applying castor oil to the abdomen, that can help soften if there's constipation. It can also help heal if there's irritable bowel. These are all defined in more detail in my book, and I also include stories of people who've totally recovered from it. Yes? What's the best way to apply castor oil is with a compress. You can rub it in, but then everything that touches your abdomen is going to stick to it. And that's why with a compress, you get several layers of cloth, moisten it with castor oil, apply it to the abdomen, cover it with plastic, and then usually your pants will hold it there. The best type of, it must be always natural fibre. And toweling is very absorbent. You might cut up an old towel. If you do muslin, you'd probably have to do about 10 layers. Yes?
The colon tea is for helping with regularity. What kind of herbs are in that?
The herbs are buckthorn, licorice, and cascara. They're the 3 herbs, but you'll see that in my book. And in my book, Sustain Me, I've got a whole chapter on the colon. Hemorrhoids at officialbarbaro'Neill.com, I know Ricky sells a little essential oil mix called Peace Please. And we have had so much positive response on that. When I was in Germany, a lady said, please, can you bring peace, please? It's the only thing that is helping me. At the same time, constipation is one of the main causes, so you have to make sure there's no pressure on there. But I don't think you'll forget peace, please. And we did look the other day, that little muscle, I've drawn it in red, that holds up the colon. So putting a stool in front of the toilet so that you mimic the squatting position, that takes all pressure off the anus and also helps to go with much greater ease. And again, in more detail in my book, Sustain Me, I've got a whole section on the colon where this is defined. I've also got a section on the stomach. And so ends our journey through the gastrointestinal tract. I trust you've enjoyed your journey. Let me close with a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for our gastrointestinal tract. Thank you so much for the simple herbs and simple dietary changes that can bring about healing. We thank you for this information in the name of Jesus. Amen. So I look forward to seeing you tonight. Thank you. you.